Okay, y'all. So this is going to be a video about essentially refinishing a Sky Touch switch rod that I bought from a Chinese company called MaxCatch Fishing. What ended up happening is that I did a rod build a few years ago, and you can actually see the rod here. And I built the TFO Deer Creek switch rod, and it was a fantastic rod. I still love the rod. What I noticed though is that when I was fishing sea run trout, the medium action of the rod made it a little hard to set the hook on some of the fish that were around the kind of 1 to 1.5 pound range. It just didn't quite tighten up the line fast enough. So what I found myself in a position for was not having a whole lot of money, but wanting a fast action switch rod. So that's when I went to MaxCatch. What I bought was this Sky Touch switch, 7 weight, 11-foot 4-piece rod. And for the most part, I mean, the rod performs relatively well. I've never had the experience of casting, a switch rod by Sage or one of the other larger companies, so I can't compare it. But what I can tell you is that it casted relatively fine for my needs. What I did notice though on the rod is there was a few things. I noticed that the foregrip for me was a bit short. I really missed having that extra section on my TFO foregrip. And the rear grip was also a bit short, and it just kind of left my bottom 2 fingers off of the grip, which sometimes I just like the feel of. Other than that, what I noticed is that the graphite itself on the blanks had no resin on it whatsoever, or no finish on it. I'm not going to put epoxy on that. I did some research on that, and what the people say that are experienced in it is that you don't want to add weight, and if you are using epoxy on that, you want it to be a very specific kind. I think it's called permagloss. But there is products made that are actually derivatives of urethanes, and so I was thinking about possibly putting a couple of fine coats of polyurethane on the blank as well. The other thing I'm going to do is remove all of the eyes. I did find that the hardware on the MaxCatch one is not the greatest. That being said, you get what you pay for, and I didn't pay a whole lot. So I'm also going to be upgrading all of the guides and the hardware, as well as the tip top. The other thing was that the rod didn't come with a hook keep. So what I'll be doing is installing a hook keep, and I'll just show you the hardware that I'm going to try and install here now. So I have a tip top. I'm actually going to go with 3 stripping guides with ceramic inlays, just to see if that has any added benefit to it. I know the ceramic should have benefit. Having 3 of them is the thing that I'm kind of going to play around with. Also, after doing quite a bit of research, it said that you really, in terms of your snake guides, you don't need to have every single number that they offer. You really want to get down to the shortest or the smallest size that you're going to use as soon as possible. So what I'm going to do is put 2 larger snake guides as well as a series of smaller snake guides. This is the hook keep that I purchased, and again you can see the tip top. What I'm going to be using was a DIY rod wrapper. If you search up, I think it's Thames River Association gives the instructions for building this DIY rod wrapper, and so that's what I'm going to end up using to refinish this rod. So I'm going to be doing stop and start videos here just to chronicle the whole process. I'll give you an idea, and I'll try and keep the length down. So I just wanted to show you what I was talking about with removing the guides. You can see that I used the razor blade here to remove the epoxy down to the blank, and this is what I'm talking about with using just a very small amount of heat. I have a votive candle here, and again I'm not trying to melt it. All I'm trying to do is soften it up, and hopefully you'll see if this works. Look at it in the other 2, just softening it up enough that when I go to grab it, you can pull it off in bands like that. It's supposed to do that immediately when you take off that top layer of epoxy and thread. That's kind of supposed to happen naturally, but I found it wasn't happening with mine anyway. It was way too hard. I couldn't peel it, but you can see just a little bit of heat, not to the point where anything's melted, but it makes a big difference. Alright, so I successfully removed the first 3 guides that are on the rod. That occurs on the second blank. And you can see the guides here. These are the guides I got with the MaxCatch rod. And you can see this is what I'm going to replace them with. Again, I'm going to go with 3 what are known as stripping guides with ceramic inlays, versus just the 2 stripping guides with, it looks like these things had aluminum inlay or something like that, and a snake guide. But before I do that, what I'm actually going to do is I have my blank set up here in my rod wrapper, and I'm actually going to put what's called an underlay, which basically is a piece of thread that sits under the foot of the guide and also spans that gap between guides. So as you can see here, we have thread wraps with epoxy, but there's a blank space in between. I'm actually going to fill that with this blue metallic thread. And then I'm going to wrap over top of that to actually seal the guides with this black metallic thread. And so the net effect, you can see I have a picture on my phone here, the net effect looks something like this. Alright, so in this segment what we're going to do is we're going to start to wrap the eyes on the actual plank. So you can see that I have the eye taped there, and I've made sure that that's in line with the spine of the rod. I also already have my thread hooked up to the blank right there, and how you would do that is no different than how you would start to tie a fly. You just want to capture your thread on the blank, get it, 2 or 3 wraps around the tag end, and then once you have it secured with 2 or 3 wraps, you can cut it off. The little white tool that I have there is actually used for paper cutting, but if you can get yourself a burnishing tool, a thread burnisher is what they call it, it's a wicked tool to help you to stack the thread up nice and neat, which is what I'm doing there. In the end of this, you'll also see me use this to flatten the thread out, and by flattening the thread, it'll cover up any kind of minute gaps between it. So we're going in fast motion here just to show me actually wrapping the thread, and I'm going to do this right up onto the foot of the guide there. And when I get it up onto the foot of the guide, to finish your wrap, what you do is you end up installing what's called a pull-through, which is essentially a piece of thread or a piece of line. In my case, what I used was 50-pound test mono. You'll see it in yellow. And what you do is you're going to capture that under the wraps, and it allows you to pull the tag end back under several wraps around the guide foot. So it's very similar to the way that a nail knot seals. And if you look up a YouTube video, I'm sure you can find lots of instructional videos on how to do it. So you can see me wrapping all the way up under the guide foot here, and in a minute we're going to come back into a regular speed video, and that's where you'll see me install the pull-through, which is right here. So this is the 50-pound mono. You're just going to see I'm going to capture that under the thread, and then I'm going to wrap anywhere from 5 to 10 times around that thread, or around that mono. So that's what I'm doing there, and I'm being really careful trying to, again, you're always trying to get the thread to lay directly beside the last wrap so that there is no space between the threads. And the tension on your thread wrapper and the angle that you use to wrap has a lot to do with that. The company Mudhole is a company in Florida, and they have a lot of great tutorial videos on how to do this stuff. So if you're interested in getting into that, that's another fantastic resource. So I'm just trying to stack the threads close here, and again I'm making turns around that mono. And in a minute what you're going to see me do is cut free the end that's fastened to the thread wrapper at this point. So you have to maintain tension, which I think I actually mistakenly don't do, but you have to maintain tension on the actual wrap, and then cut loose the tag end. When the tag end is loose, and you can see me doing it here, when the tag end is loose, what you'll be able to do is pass it through the loop of the pull-through. So you'll see me pass it through the loop here. And then again, while maintaining the tension, you're going to pull that loop out, and that's going to draw that tag end under several loops of the thread wrap. And at this point, that wrap is sealed. So all that's left to be done is to epoxy that. You can lay a razor flat against the body of it and just bring the thread up to the razor's edge if it's a sharp razor, and that provides you with a really clean cut. And there's me flattening out the thread. So this is my Makeshift Rod Dryer. It's basically a rotisserie motor from a barbecue set that I've kind of rigged up. And it did okay with the last build I did with the TFO rod, so I figured I would use it for this rod. And in a minute here, I'm just going to mix up some epoxy. When you're mixing epoxy, you're supposed to try and mix it gently so that you don't get bubbles in the finish. If you do happen to get bubbles in the finish, you can see I have a small votive candle there, as well as a lighter. What I can do is apply heat to the finish. It'll change its viscosity and allow for the air bubbles in the finish to come out. So we have this going in fast motion. My rod dryer is a pretty slow RPM. So you can see me just kind of pushing around the epoxy. And that's important, that aside from underneath the rod guide, which I do kind of brush on, for the rest of this you're kind of just
guiding the epoxy along the blank, so you're not really brushing anything. And there you can see me kind of getting rid of any bubbles, giving that nice clear finish. So what we've done here, I'm just pointing out the gold markings along the rod. Those gold markings correspond to regulation lengths that are associated with different fish. That particular corded drill there is what I'm going to set up as a lathe to help me spin my cork handle. I tried it with a cordless drill. I have a DeWalt 20 volt cordless drill, and even with 2 full batteries I was getting nowhere. It really benefits to have a corded drill in this instance. So you can see the markings there. I gotta be honest with you, I do keep a feed of trout every year. I usually keep them from the Cape Breton area. I typically don't keep big fish, but I do like to keep fish that are about 1 or 2 pounds. And so those gold markings there are basically legal size limits for the sport fish that I care about. So there's one at the very bottom in the back end of the rod there that you can see in the right hand side. That's 14 inches, and that corresponds to me understanding the 13.8 inch size limit on trout in certain places in Nova Scotia, that one right there. This one here is 27 inches, and that's for any striped bass I fish. Now, I don't retain salmon, but I put these markings, these next 3, on the rod for the purpose of salmon. We like to talk about how long our fish was in terms of salmon, so what you're looking at there is a 30, 35, and a 40, just to give me an idea of when I've caught, if I catch a fish, I can say, yeah, it was 40 inches or it was over 40 inches. So here's what I've done with the cork rings. I took my drill and a round bastard file, or rat tail file, and I reamed out the cork rings so that they would fit around the base of the rod blank there. You can see at the bottom of the screen. And so here you're seeing me just turn out the cork. The power drill is a huge asset here. The fact that I didn't have to stop except for when the chuck backed off a bit, it took not too long at all.
Alright, so we're actually at the finishing touches stages. So the last thing I wanted to do is put an epoxy around my hook keep, but I do want to share kind of a learning experience with you. Full disclosure, like I said, I'm not a professional, just a hobbyist who loves fishing, so I wanted to try and do this myself to upgrade this rod. If you notice the drill setup that I was using to turn out my cork, I actually got my cork to come out really nice. I'm happy with how that worked. What I did not realize is that while I was turning down the cork, at one point I had placed my hand on the rod to kind of keep it from bouncing. Obviously I didn't have, again, the most professional setup, but when I did that and I applied the pressure of the sandpaper, the friction got taken up by the felt against the rod blank, and it literally got so hot that it destroyed the felt, and this was in a matter of like 10 seconds, and actually you can see here it actually burnt through the epoxy. Now luckily it didn't actually affect the rod blank. The rod blank seems fine, but just full disclosure, if you're going to try something like this, that might be something you want to be aware of. So what I have now is a very low RPM motor, and again I'm just going to epoxy this, and then it's essentially done. I was thinking about possibly staining the cork handle a different color, but other than that we're done. So thanks for watching. Alright, and so here we have the finished project. So what you can see is that I stained the cork handle. I might actually put a little more like Minwax Provincial just to give that a little different color than just the gray. But I thought that would kind of look nice, and I think as it weathers it'll look even better. Installed the hook keep, like I said. I ended up putting a coating of polyurethane, which I don't love how it finished. I think I may have gone with too heavy of a coat, so I may end up actually sanding that back and then trying to put another coat on it. In the second section of the rod, we've got our markers for the different sizes. All of the hardware has been replaced, and we do have the 3 stripping guides as opposed to the 2 stripping with aluminum. We've got the 3 stripping all with ceramic. Then again, same thing, switching over to the snake guides. We've got the gold hardware, everything pre-wrapped, and again coated with polyurethane. And again, the final 4 guides, final 4 snake guides, and the tip top. So there you have it. There's the entire project completed. Thanks for watching.